Thank you. Africa, thank you very much for the kind words, and I really enjoyed Sabri's presentation. We have the same agenda on that topic. It's very exciting. And the last time I was here at this conference, you asked me to speak about costs in universities, and now that's really hit home for all of us. And so today I get to speak about the future, which everybody can relax a little bit about the reality facing you with budget cuts. And it's in this way I'm breaking some of the best advice that I ever got from professors when I was a postgraduate student. So one of my professors said, we should never forecast. But then he said, inevitably you are going to be asked to forecast. So here is some good advice. If you have to forecast, then forecast often and forecast long. So if you forecast often, there will always be some of your forecasts that are coming good, and people will forget the ones that are going bad, and you just have to point out the ones where you were right. And if you forecast long, then people will forget most of your forecasts, and if only you remember the few that will turn out well, then in future I can say, back then in 2018, when I was here, I cautioned you about the cost disease in higher education in South Africa. So today I will give you many forecasts, at least some of which must turn out correct, and I will give you long-term forecasts which I hope will reach beyond my retirement date at 2037, at which point I will point to the ones that came good and I will conveniently forget which ones didn't turn out so well. Now, universities are very old. At least in the modern form, we speak about a 1,000-year history, and they've changed a lot over the centuries. In recent years, this change has really accelerated. And around the world, we are facing significant disruption at all universities. Almost everywhere, we face declining government funding. So there was a sweet spot in the middle of the 20th century where enormous public funds flowed to public universities, and that era is very thoroughly behind us. We're also seeing disruptions to from alternatives to traditional academic programs. So real alternatives have come on the market, and we are facing a struggle for the attention of our students and our funders from highly innovative alternatives. In the rest of the world, there's falling enrollment due to population aging. And in fact, that's a very serious problem in much of the global north. Not our problem at this point. We have an opportunity. Our opportunity is a rising bulge of young Africans who cannot be served by the current population of universities on this continent. We have a tremendous opportunity in this area, and if we neglect the opportunity, we will also be neglecting the economic future of our continent. And then all of us, have the immense cost of managing those two business models in one, of a teaching and learning university on which we have plugged a research institute. These are two very different businesses, but we have mixed up their cost, and it's expensive here and it's expensive everywhere. Now, if you think about the international rankings, what those rankings do is they tell you more or less how much you look like Harvard or Oxford. And that's problematic because this business model doesn't work at Harvard and Oxford either. So at Harvard this year, the recurring revenue of that fantastically successful university will pay 55% of their operating costs, including salaries. The other 45% they get from the investment income on their $54 billion endowment and direct donations this year. So that's not a business model that checks out, right? It's only because they've got a $54 billion endowment that they can run the university like they run the university at Harvard. At Oxford, the VC retired earlier this year, and in her final interview in the Financial Times, she said cheerfully, "We lose money on every student we admit, and we lose money on almost every research tranche that we take." That's not something that anybody in this room can say. If we took that attitude at a South African university, we would close down. but we are ranked against universities that have the resources that they've accumulated over many centuries to be able to do that. So we face additional risks. We face very serious difficulties with NSFAS. We face declining government subsidy, and these things are of course related. We face a stagnant economy. As I stand here today, per capita GDP in this country is at the same level as the third quarter of 2007. So we've lost 15 years of economic progress in a country that had very serious social and economic needs in 2007. So instead of the 15 years of progress we wanted, we've had 15 years of stagnation. So from where I stand, the question now is, how will universities contribute to the turnaround? And I really believe that we are part of the solution, as universities have always been. So universities have been some of the most dynamic participants in society for this last millennium that I spoke about. And I believe the way to achieve this is a formula that I've captured with an acronym. In Stellenbosch, we love acronyms. So you can only know that you've got a solid idea if you've got an acronym for it. So my acronym for this one is HESU, H-E-S-U, and that stands for High Impact, Efficient, Scalable University. And all of those words are important, and so I don't think it's a trivial formula. Universities have had high impact for many centuries, but efficiency and scalability are not typical features of successful public universities. I remind you of the words of the retiring VC at Oxford. So a high impact, and we just saw the tremendous impact of their tech transfer system in Salisbury's presentation. So tremendous impact. But on efficiency and scalability, well, Oxford has 26,000 students, and even at Stellenbosch, we have 32,000 students. So with 850 years of accumulation and success, they are not even presenting an academic program at the scale that we do down the road in Stellenbosch. Efficiency and scalability has not been a feature of higher education over the course of this last millennium. And given the disruptions that I've mentioned at the start of my talk, efficiency and scalability is going to be required for successful universities in the future, especially if we want to unlock the tremendous high impact that we can have. So we will have to work towards scalability. Now, by scalability, I mean the ability of an organization to perform well under an increased or expanding workload. A system that scales well will be able to maintain or increase its level of performance even as it is tested by larger and larger operational demands. Now, I know this sounds like one of two things, either labor exploitation or some sort of magic. But it is neither of these two things. It is, in fact, the logic of the Industrial Revolution. It is that remarkable change, which is why we economists regard the Industrial Revolution as the single most significant fact in human history. And I'm going to give you a quick image in this hall to demonstrate it. So if I start at the wall there on my right-hand side, and that's now going to be 13,000 years ago. So I'm turning the clock back very quickly, and this goes much faster than my lectures, so you'll be very relieved to hear that. At 13,000 years ago, against that wall, I'm starting with a shopping trolley that's 1 meter high. And that, I'm going to say, is the amount of goods and services you need for survival. So it is a basket that all that it will do is the society will be able to sustain itself from a year-on-year basis. There will be no growth in that society. So that's where we start 13,000 years ago, and that is just about what we know the production capacity of our species was 13,000 years ago. Now I'm going to run that trolley forward very quickly. And by the time it reaches the sort of second table in, at that point, the basket grows by about 40%. So now it's 1.4 meters high. What is that 40% growth? It's what we call the agricultural revolution. We learn how to cultivate and tame animals, And that's so animal husbandry and cultivation of crops bring a 40% increase in the resources available to the average person. Now the time runs forward again. And by the time we meet the table here in front of me, it goes another 20 percentage points up. So now we're at 1.6 meters. And that's what we call the Bronze Age. It's not really about metallurgy, it's about writing and collaboration. Right, so that's the beauty, right? So we learn to write as a species, not to write poetry, but to do accounting. We learned to write so that we could trade over hundreds and even thousands of kilometers. And then later on, we thought this is also a great idea to write some beautiful poetry with it. We thank our accountants for that great cultural leap forward. Now, on the economic side, things are not going forward so rapidly because this trolley will now run forward and absolutely nothing happens to it as I pass these tables. And it's only at about the third table from the far wall over there that it starts to grow slowly in some parts of the world. At the second last table, it finally reaches 2 meters high. So almost the entire hall was required for the average person in the world to have twice the resources required for mere subsistence. And then when we pass the last table, in some parts of the world, that trolley starts to grow. And when we hit the wall at the other side, in those parts of the world that have been part of the Industrial Revolution, the trolley is as high as a 23-story building. So that is why we call it the most significant fact in human history. It's that astonishing transformation, a right-hand turn in prosperity occurs in the very last minute of my story. And universities have been crucial in providing the technology that is a part of that logic. This is not, that astonishing growth I've just sketched for you was not achieved mainly by extracting more resources. It was mainly achieved by using the resources we have more productively. 2/3 of that growth is in productivity gain. 1/3 is in resources. 2/3 is in productivity growth. And that's what's going to be required at universities too. So in the same way that we made the production of goods and services in society tremendously more productive, we will have to think about providing educational services tremendously more productive. Through process innovation, through standardization, through modularization, through algorithmic thinking, and through the application of technology. So how are we going to do that? And I'm going to use this lens of HESU, of high impact, efficient scalability, and then I'm going to unpack it on the two sides. I'm going to start with high impact, and then I'm going to talk about efficient scalability, and those are the dimensions I'm going to unpack for you very briefly. So on the high impact side, I forecast 3 important developments that will help us towards this high impact, efficient, scalable university. And they are interdisciplinary focus, collaborative learning, and lifelong learning. So let me start with interdisciplinary focus. In fact, we saw in the previous presentation the scope for universities having an impact on solving the difficult problems of society. But the difficult problems of society, and perhaps the most obvious example to all of us in this hall, is the problem of climate change, is not a problem that resides in a discipline. It is a problem in which you need to bring natural scientists, geographers, meteorologists, data scientists, engineers, as well as ethicists and economists together to think jointly, not just to understand the problem, but to think about potential solutions for those problems. So we need to find ways in the university to work in an interdisciplinary space where we generate knowledge, but crucially also to help our students to develop the skills to work in an interdisciplinary space. And our students are already asking for this. They are asking for more flexibility in our programs that offers them the chance for multiple outcomes as they enter the university. Now, this leads me to the second feature that I foresee. So I foresee more interdisciplinary work, and I foresee lifelong learning. Because for the same reason that the problems of our society are not neatly contained in particular disciplines, for the same reason your preparation at university is not going to be adequate for the demands that will be required from you for a career that now will last likely 30, 40, or even 50 years into the future. So our job as universities and as the higher education sector in general is to provide not just learning, but repeated learning opportunities. So I think of this as expanding sort of vertically into the life of our students. So we want to expand horizontally with scale to South Africans who don't yet have access to training, but we also want to expand vertically into the lives of those who have already had that opportunity and who is going to come back to us to ask for repeated learning opportunities. These repeated opportunities will not look like the degree programs we present at the undergraduate level. There's no need for them to do so. I spent 5 weeks at the Wharton Business School in America on a 5-week program. It was an advanced management program, and that 5-week program, which is got no degree, there's no diploma attached to it, but it was 5 of the most impactful weeks of my total education. So we can find different ways of making tremendously impactful interventions, even beyond what we think of as the traditional program and quality mix. So when we talk about lifelong learning, we have to then talk about credentialing. So we are used to credentialing in the forms of degrees and diplomas, and that's in South Africa what we do through the South African National Qualifications Framework. But as I mentioned to you, no degree, no diploma at Wharton, but one of the richest educational experiences of my life. And we need to find ways of unlocking such experiences for our students, and in fact they are already asking for it. So it is especially important given the likely need that people will come back to us for retraining, for additional educational opportunities that will not fit into our PQM. Now, you are right that I haven't, if you suspect that I haven't yet said too much about the world of purchasing and operations. And that is true. The third dimension is where we're going to get to the world of purchasing and operations, because here I'm going to talk about collaborative learning. So for 1,000 years, we had a model of individual mastery at university. So you come to university to gain individual mastery, and in fact, for hundreds of years, the desired outcome was ultimately to be called a master of a particular subject. It was a model that universities borrowed from medieval guilds. So ultimately, you become an academic master as opposed to a master tradesman. But we expect that students will need collaborative learning, because in a world of rapid technological advance, where we can add value is especially on interpersonal and soft skills, more so than in some of the harder skills, which we will find more easily to do with computers. So in this collaborative learning model, there's going to be a real technological and a real physical challenge for us to think around how we arrange our campuses and how we arrange the experience of students who are not necessarily on our campus. So when I get to the efficient scalability side, that is going to be an important agenda for everybody here in this room. The University of the Future, as I said, is likely to place a greater emphasis on lifelong learning, providing education and training opportunities to individuals throughout their careers as the pace of technological change continues to accelerate. And a high-impact university will have to be a part of that solution. So high-impact university is one in which we have those 3 dimensions that I've already mentioned: interdisciplinarity, collaborative learning, and lifelong learning. Now I'm going to get to the efficient and scalability side. So that's where the colleagues in this room are experts. And the first part really is in your world. And I've had the opportunity to walk around some of the exhibition before the session this morning. And the first theme here is what I'm going to call hyper-automation. So 4 themes on efficient scalability: hyper-automation, personalization, student success analytics, and artificial intelligence, and virtual and augmented reality. And there really is a lot of that out here at this conference already. So we need to unlock efficiencies in the same way that the Industrial Revolution has always done. So that story that I told you is a story with a 2-fold logic. specialization, and collaboration. So that specialization means that we use algorithmic thinking and digitalization of our business processes so that we can rationalize those processes through modularization and repetition. So like I said, that's not a new idea, but it's tremendously powerful. It's the single most powerful thing we as social animals have ever discovered. And currently, in its current form, with the tremendous assistance of technology, this is called hyper-automation if you do it across many dimensions of a large institution as a modern university. Now, let me give you an example of where we are not doing it. So we have just redone our main library on the Stellenbosch campus. And it's, of course, now a beautifully technologically assisted library. And it includes robot checkout desks. And they're not really robots, but I call them robot checkout desks. And you take the book yourself insofar as you now want a book, because as you know, most of our interaction with a modern university library is electronic. But there are some millions of books still, and so you can take a book, and that's what you do. You go to this machine, and the machine will check the book out for you. And recently I went to the library to renew a book that I had borrowed from the library. And I did that to test the system. So I walked up to the colleague at the counter, and I said, can you please help me check out the book? And the colleague said, well, it's no problem, and opened the book and stamped a card in front of the book and checked it out on my behalf. That's a disaster. We've installed an extremely expensive electronic system. The fact that there was a colleague who was willing to do it for me in the same way that they would have done 30 years ago means that we have not automated anything in the library. We've got it wrong. We've done what universities often do, is we introduce the cutting edge technology and then we keep the old technology alive next to it. The logic of automation requires us to reassign that colleague, to give them an entirely different job. They should simply have been assigned to point me to the new computers to say that's where you check out your book, and there will be a helpful instructive video if I can't follow the easy steps. But that is where we have often failed at universities, is precisely at that moment. It's not a reluctance to adopt technology. As you know, we've got colleagues who always push us to the frontier on that. It's to have the strength of our conviction to say, and now the process will be different. And you cannot come and ask me afterwards that I want to check out my book like I've done for the last 40 years. That process is no longer available. Books are now checked out in this way. And that scales for everything else. We are just implementing a new financial system at Stellenbosch as well. And it is very traumatic. If you've had 30 years of a mainframe system that's incredibly customized to the minutest needs of colleagues, and you now introduced a cloud-based software as a service, standardized product that's absolutely suitable for a research-intensive university, then the answer to many questions of the following kind is, how can I do that report that I used to do? The answer is you can't. It's not necessary, and it's not available. But let me help you see what it is that you need, and of course that is available on the particular platform that we've implemented. But the question of how can we do what we used to do, the answer to that is it is no longer done. The process is gone. When I started my career, I worked in investments in London, and I had a very experienced colleague who would take me on educational walks. One of those educational walks took us to Finsbury Circus. Those of you who know London will know it's a sort of a circle close to Liverpool Street Station, surrounded by office buildings. And if you stand in the middle of Finsbury Circus, you look at the headquarters of BP, of British Petroleum. It's about a 5-story high building. But the beauty of the demonstration is, if you look beyond the building, there is a high-rise of about 35 stories that rises behind it. BP used to consume the entire 35 stories when it was a public company up to the mid-1980s. When it was privatized, the logic that I've just described was applied to it, and they moved everything that was done in 35 floors, was moved into the 5-story headquarters of current BP. Entire careers in old BP was made by sending memorandums up and down up and down that building. They had an internal system that sucked the papers up more rapidly so that memorandums could be written with greater efficiency. But the crucial point was to stop the memorandums, not to make them even faster, but to move to an entirely different system, to move from the 35 stories and to move into the 5-story new headquarters. That's a tremendous challenge to us. It is not the natural culture of a public university, but it is going to be necessary for us, especially if we're going to meet the needs of efficient scalability at our universities. Our society requires us to scale up our impact. We cannot do so with the model that we currently have. You already know it. You have to implement budget cuts in the current system. And so if I ask you to increase scale and you have to do budget cuts, you realize that we have to do things very differently. The current model simply cannot deliver it. So that is hyper-automation. The second dimension I want to discuss is personalization. So that's now on the efficiency side. And it might sound like a contradiction. How can I now even ask you to personalize our academic service if I've just asked you to operate more efficiently with fewer resources? And the answer is really an extension of my previous answer. We can only achieve this level of efficiency through this model of hyper-automation. And the beauty is that hyper-automation is precisely what gives you the power for personalization. So if you do it correctly, if you do hyper-automation correctly, your students will be able to engage with your platform in such a way that the platform will be able to provide them with a bespoke service according to their circumstances and their needs. Now, it isn't just the current learning management system that you have that I'm talking about. In the literature, the reference now is to a so-called learning experience platform, ancillary to your learning management system. And what that learning experience platform's objective is to provide every student with a richer experience beyond the immediate academic and certified framework that's on your LMS, but to use both internal and external sources, as well as knowledge of the needs, so highly data-informed needs of the particular needs and circumstances of the student, to provide them with additional inputs. The kind of inputs that you used to get when I was a student by paying attention to the posters on campus. So it turns out one of the richest experiences of my first year as a student in mathematics was to attend a movie discussion, which doesn't sound like an academic activity, but in Stellenbosch, one of the most legendary figures was the late Professor Johan Degenaar, a very famous philosopher in our context, and this discussion of the movie Cyrano de Bergerac was one of the most enriching experiences I had as a first-year student. I saw that by accident by seeing a poster outside the library. And a learning experience program will be able to provide that, will understand already where my interests lie, and will feed me with this kind of additional information and additional experience. So to be able to do that, we'll achieve greater personalization, we'll get content curation. Of course, this is, you will appreciate that these LXPs, these learning experience programs, are driven through AI. They provide a gamified user experience and an expanded breadth of content. And I think, colleagues, we have to appreciate that the clients for this grew up in a very different environment from us. They are like my kids who are now in high school, who are digital natives. They have a very different experience. It was sobering for me very many years ago. I think my eldest was only about 6 years old. And she asked me a difficult question at dinner, to which I simply admitted that I don't know the answer. And she was unperturbed by this. She says, "I know you don't know, just type it there." So she had already intuited that there's a different world out there which you can get the answers to all of these questions by simply interacting with the virtual world. And she couldn't understand why I thought she was actually asking me the question. She just used me as the interface with a vehicle that was going to give her the actual answer. So they grow up from a very early age to understand that this mixture of internal and external resources is how you are going to answer the difficult questions that you are grappling with. And it's time that we set up our universities to be in step with that. So that is the possibility of a learning experience platform to provide real personalization. But that's, as I said, ancillary to the formal program. Within the formal program, we also need to use the powerful tools of data science to improve our student success analytics. So this is not to provide content, but this is to help student success. This is to work with a very rich set of data about the particular student to encourage and to provide feedback to that student from early on. I spoke to our DVC for Learning and Teaching this morning, for example. We're currently working on a new electronic feedback system for students. And of course, the crucial point is not to get feedback the way I used to get when I lectured 20 years ago, which was a form at the end of the semester to congratulate me on how well I had done the semester. The crucial point is to get feedback at the end of the first week so that we know if something is going wrong in the module. Of course, that might not be going wrong in a generalized way. It might just be going wrong in the interaction of a particular student or a handful of students, and we need to know that up front so that we can do the intervention at the beginning of the semester and that we can provide them with the best opportunity of studying with success in that semester, as opposed to sitting at the end of the semester with a student or a group of students who failed the program and who now will either require an extra academic year or an expensive intervention like a summer or a winter school. So these are all workarounds to problems that we can solve if we work more effectively with personalization. In this case, that will be personalization on our learning management system and in combination with our student information system. Now that is highly relevant to everybody in this room because you need to think about the kind of student information systems that we install at our university or the kind of learning management systems, and especially their interoperability, the ability to combine the information of the one with the other into that rich experience so that we can provide maximum student success. So it is in a sector where, as you know, the pass-through rate is inadequately high across our sector. But it's especially inadequately high for the students who are more weaker prepared to come to university. For us, it is not a nice to have these kinds of interventions to provide the right support for those students so that they can also study with success. So it's consistent with what I've already described. It is an agenda for broader access, but it is also an agenda for broader success if we build a successful, scalable university like this. And then I get to the tech part of efficient scalability in machine learning, in virtual and augmented reality, and in AI. And whereas the possibilities of virtual and augmented reality are still somewhat in the future, I would say beyond the next 5 years for it to make a considerable impact on the work of South African universities. AI is already here. It is already having an impact on your universities. And it's having an impact in a way that we don't even always understand. Some of it scares us. On assessments and on the integrity of the academic program, it freaks us out. So it feels disruptive and it feels like a negative force. But there's also tremendous scope for using it to achieve that 35 building reduction to the 5-story head office. For example, the tremendous scope of AI, of generative AI, to reduce the burden of the tremendous reporting that we have within our universities. I walked into the office of a young colleague the other day, and he was writing a review for an academic paper. And he's a very respected and successful young scholar. And I said, what are you doing? He said, I'm writing this review, and I'm using ChatGPT to help me formulate. So I've got the main points, and then I say to ChatGPT, put this now in paragraphs, and crucially, use my style. So he could have written it in either my Stan's style, or in his style, or in the style of Hemingway. It's astonishing what ChatGPT already knows about my style, that it can answer that question. You could ask him to write a report in Stan's style to the Senate at Stellenbosch. You know how long it takes you to write reports, colleagues. You know the tremendous part of the salaried hours at universities spent on report writing. We can grapple with the possibility that we can radically reduce that you can get your first draft on ChatGPT and spend your time reviewing a first draft instead of spending the enormous amount of time of writing that first draft. And then, of course, you mustn't do what the library did. You must then reassign the resources that you freed up to do something which we currently cannot do. So expand our scale. That's how we get to the efficient scalability of the university, is to say this is no longer necessary. We no longer need to assign resources to this activity. We're going to hand that over to generative AI, and we're going to reassign those resources elsewhere where we've never had adequate resources within the university. That's on the AI side. On the virtual reality side, a brief comment. I've had the opportunity to see a virtual reality cadaver. So this is it's a virtual reality bench with a simulated cadaver on it, in which you can literally stand with your medical tools with a scalpel, and you can cut open the virtual body, and it is a perfect rendition of a human body. That is important because of the tremendous cost of medical training in this country. So we are blessed with outstanding medical training at all of the medical faculties. But you also know, colleagues, that our medical training is prohibitively expensive. That's why we manage to train so few doctors in a country where the need for medical assistance is so great. The current medical training system in South Africa is perhaps the best example of a non-scalable part of the university sector. It's simply too expensive. But it doesn't have to be that expensive. What makes it so expensive is the clinical contact time and the resources required to run that properly within modern health and safety standards. But that is precisely where there is tremendous scope for us to use virtual and augmented reality to radically lower the cost of medical training. And I think it is in the future, but it's not that far in the future. It's just over the sort of 5-year horizon. I'm going to conclude. You have realized, no doubt, that I have cheated. Instead of forecasting, I've told you not what I think will happen, but I told you what I want to happen. Now, that is a distinction, by the way, the distinction between forecasting and wishful thinking, which is not nearly as discredited as you might think. My wishful thinking are forecasts, but they are the forecasts in which we can actively participate. And I hope to persuade you to join me in actively working for these things. I'm not just forecasting as a disinterested bystander, but as a participant in that which I'm forecasting. And I've argued that I would like to work towards high-impact, scalable universities across South Africa. And then on the high-impact side, on 3 particular dimensions: on the interdisciplinary focus of universities, on collaborative learning, and on lifelong learning. And on the efficient scale side, I argued for hyper-automation, personalization, student success analytics, and artificial intelligence, and virtual and augmented reality. So my final word is an invitation to you. Join me as we work towards high-impact, efficient, scalable South African universities to realize the impact that we as a sector can have towards a better future for our country. Thank you.